Hello and welcome to the GMS Magazine podcast. I am Paco Garcia, your host, and this is the RPG Interview Room, the show in which I am lucky enough to get together with some of the best people in the world of role-playing games and ask them a ton of questions about their projects, both past, present, and future. Today I have a very interesting author with me. Their name is Amos and they are from Sweden, funnily enough, because believe me, Sweden has a really vibrant community and has produced some absolutely incredible games. Seriously fantastic. In this particular case, Amos is bringing Blood Feud to the realm of reality. And it's a game about Vikings, which is really cool. But what makes it different, and as far as I'm concerned, even cooler, and please don't go away, is that it deals with topics of toxic masculinity within the Viking culture. Stop, don't go, stop it. It's not against masculinity, it's not against Vikings, it's not against men, it's nothing to do with that. It is to do about exploring the issues within Viking culture that were problematic. And believe you me, there were a lot of them. So it's okay, it's not a big deal. Well, it used to be a big deal. Now it's a different deal. But the game is fantastic. It sounds really good. It sounds really, really amazing. So please, just listen to it. Trust me. It's not what it may sound. Trust me on this one, because it has some absolutely fantastic mechanics and mechanisms within it. So, before continuing to the interview, though, please support us on Patreon if you possibly can. It's just a couple of dollars a month, and it really helps keep this channel and the podcast and everything going. Trust me, it really helps a lot. There is a link in the show notes and video description. And other than that, that was the door locked by my dog. I'm going to be talking to you very soon. Here's Amos. Amos, welcome to the show, my friend. This is the first time that we get to chat. Hopefully, not the last, because you're publishing one of the most unapologetically daring games I have ever heard of, which is incredibly fantastic. Welcome.
Thank you for that fantastic introduction. It's great to be on here and get to talk about my unapologetically daring game.
Well, okay. Before we get into the game, because I have so many questions to ask you, and I want to know so many things about you and the game, but because we haven't really ever spoken before, I'm gonna need to make sure that you know how to answer questions and you're not a politician, because then I need to kind of
adjust a little bit.
Exactly. So I have 5 questions to ask you to get us in the in the mood of doing interviewing stuff. Okay. These are very easy questions. So question number 1: tea or coffee?
Depending on the mood, mostly.
Okay.
Coffee out of necessity, tea out of pleasure.
Okay. I love that. The caffeine shows its power. Mm-hmm. Okay. Question number 2: cars or motorbikes?
Public transportation. So
okay. So buses, good, or trains. Okay. Okay, the beach or the mountain?
Easily the mountain, very easily.
Okay, that's a very good one. Okay, now we're getting a little bit harder. I think fantasy or science fiction?
Ooh, ideally both at the same time, quite frankly.
Okay, science fantasy. I can live with that. Star Wars, yes. Which have got in trouble in the past for saying that. Some people didn't like the idea that Star Wars is science fantasy.
Yeah.
Okay, last question: zombies or vampires?
Vampires, because I get to be moody.
Yeah, that's totally true. And you can do a lot more things with them. Let's face it. What do you do with zombies? Quick or slow? Not much you can do.
Yeah.
Okay. This is exciting for me because you are publishing a game that directly explores toxic masculinity,
That is correct.
which is quite amazing at many, many fronts and incredibly brave because I can imagine some of the comments that you must have got for it. But before we go into Blood Feud, tell me a little bit about you as a player and as an author. You are in Sweden.
That is correct. So,
which is a country that has produced some absolutely incredible games in the past. Tell me about you as a gamer. Where do you come from?
So I'm when it comes to role-playing games, because it's mostly games that I play these days. When I'm talking about my role-playing game, I'm generally speaking, we talk about role-playing games. So when it comes to role-playing games, I like the creative side of it. That's always been what got me to stick to the hobby. Originally I started out with it because it was a way to hang out with my friends. That was great. And then I realized that I want to be the diva, quite frankly. Right? I want the attention. I want to do the performance. I want to make stories. And then when I got back into role-playing a bit more, it was with the express purpose of becoming better at telling stories because I wanted to be an author back then. And gradually that has ended up with me having to construct systems for myself in order to play the way I really want to play. So that kind of summarizes that, I guess.
Which it sparks very much my curiosity because it begs the question, what kind of game do you want to play?
It turns out after trying many different types of styles and many different failed projects that what I really like to do is something very freeform with a lot of improvisational theater, with a lot of very tight scene cutting. Okay, so it turns out I can play entirely freeform and be really happy, but I have developed all of these systems that do various different types of interactions between players in interesting ways in order to get to the point that I could have just decided I needed D6 and some friends.
So you're more of a narrativistic player than a mechanical player?
Absolutely. Specifically when it comes to my designing, I'm actually more interested in the types of mechanics that I would call soft mechanics versus hard mechanics, where soft mechanics is interactions between the people at the player. How do we structure those? Do we structure those in a certain way? So those types of mechanics tend to interest me more than what die do we roll.
So I can imagine that Blood Feud has not been your first game.
No, it is not. It's also not very typical game for me either. And I think part of that is because there's two people of us designing it. It's me and Peter Malmberg who are doing this together. And you can see a lot of frankly, but you can see a lot of his gene contribution to Blood Feud gene pool in it. And you can see a lot of stuff that is more typical of what I would normally make in a game. So
when did Black Fisk start? Because taking a look, and I know that we're going to concentrate on an awful lot of Blood Feud, but you have already published several games in Swedish and another game, Traffic Lights, in English. So you are a veteran of the publishing business in Sweden, which by itself I'm already very curious about because it's a country I don't really know much from the point of view of role-playing games. How did Black Fisk start and why?
So Black Fisk, or as we would say, Black Fisk. I do not expect anyone to be able to pull off that pronunciation. Don't worry. We have a Northern Germanic language. It's just very different. That's how it is. And it started out as, and it still to a very large degree is, 3 separate game authors who had been publishing games independently and realized you're good at economy, you are an illustrator, and you are excellent at marketing. Why don't these three band together and for the publishing company, and then they can help out where we could share the strengths? And it's turned out that they turn into this tightly little team that, for some reason, well, I can understand it, but for some reason, everybody in Sweden seems to love them. And I mean, they make great games. And technically, I'm not actually a part of Blackfish Publishing. It just appears that way because I work quite closely with them on this project since Peter Malmberg, my fellow author, is one part of Blackfish Publishing. And because they're so small and it's literally just 3 indie game authors who went together and started making games together, working together is often very informal. There's no bureaucracy built up around it. It's not like a full-on company. It's just 3 people. And it only started, I believe, somewhere around 2 years ago. So it's really new.
What about you as your game? Is this your first published game, or have you done something before that has already been played by, the general public?
So it is my first formally published role-playing game. I have published a card game previously, card/board game previously, and I have an ongoing in development project where instead of going directly to a publisher and trying to publish it, I've tried to first build a bit of a playing community. So that game has been played in multiple different countries now, more countries than I think Blood Feud, and by people. I've met people at a party and I mentioned, oh, by the way, this is the game I play most of the time. And I just name drop my game Chameleon. And it's oh yeah, I've heard about that. And it's the person I've never met. So what do I make of that? I don't quite know, but it's exciting.
Yeah, that sounds good.
I do, and then I have other smaller little game projects. They're around there, but this is my first one that I'm officially going to put my name on out there in the world. That is a role-playing game.
Okay, let's jump into this. 2 feet forward, because I am really excited about somebody who actually is. I don't know if you're fearless about this, but definitely brave enough to bring out a game that combines toxic masculinity and Vikings all at the same time. Why?
Honestly, my friend said to me, Peter said to me one afternoon, hey, I was playing Sagas of the Icelanders, I believe the game is called. It was a Viking game. I haven't played it myself. And he was very interested in how they handle gender roles. So he wanted to make a Viking game that also goes deeper in exploring gender roles. And I said, yeah, let's do this. Because for a very long time, I'd wanted to make a game that specifically focuses on toxic masculinity in various ways. And specifically, what does toxic masculinity look like as someone who's expected to portray it and exhibit it? Because that is kind of the niche that I feel that this game can show. That's what this game contributes to a conversation about toxic masculinity. Okay, what does it feel like from the inside?
Why did you choose the Viking world to do it? Is it because your familiarity with it? Is it because there was an awful lot of toxic masculinity about it? Or why Vikings and not generic fantasy?
I think it's partly preference from the authors when it comes to time period we like to work with. But to me, it's a very natural fit because of our image the Viking, which is very, very unrealistic. It has nothing to do with historical sources. It's mostly based on national romantic image from the 19th century, largely. But there is so much toxicity wrapped up into who a Viking is supposed to be that it makes sense that if we're going to study toxic masculinity, we should go to a shiny example of where toxic masculinity is exalted.
But
and question why.
Okay, but that doesn't mean the game is going to be historically accurate in brackets, correct?
No, because frankly put, I don't think there is such a thing as historically accurate, but we have based it primarily around the material we have. Like, we have looked to the written sources of the sagas, like the Icelandic sagas, which is as far back as you can go when it comes to Vikings. And we have looked at norms in those because both of us are quite familiar with them, and really tried to study what kind of behavior did they use in order to signal dominance and masculinity and other types of stuff. So it just ended up being probably a bit more historically accurate than you'd expect for a game that isn't necessarily aiming at 100% historical accuracy.
Okay. How does, and this is a slightly unrelated question, but how does, Vikings' toxic masculinity from, centuries ago relate to toxic masculinity today? Have you found that the same issues still happen?
Oh, that is the central question of the game. You've hit the nail on the head right there. Does it? A large part of what we want out of this game is for players to sit down and explore this concept at a little bit of an arm's length at first. These are Vikings. They're not me. They're acting this way. And then you're going to play it out, explore it, feel it, hopefully start recognizing, okay, I recognize this feeling, or no, this is a feeling I don't recognize, regardless of what it is. And just try to understand their structures. And then at the end, we're going to have the debrief. And one of the questions we are going to ask you is the one you just asked me. What parallels do you see? And quite frankly, one of the reasons I was so happy to look into the Viking Age in particular is because of the way that homophobia is expressed differently and the way that sexuality functioned quite differently. Because something that we often like to, again, now we're going right into the very controversial side of this game. It's kind of like hidden a little bit underneath the surface, but there's no such concept as heterosexuality in this game. It doesn't exist. You just don't care about that because that term was not invented until the 19th century originally as a mental disorder. They didn't think in those terms. They thought in completely different terms. Homophobia still existed. Many of the structures still existed. But it doesn't function the same way. And if you look to the rules of just what happens to someone when they're having a sexual relationship, you can see that that's not what would happen today. Society will react differently than you would today in certain circumstances. So there are some very interesting differences that you can talk about because we are looking at Viking toxic masculinity and how Viking toxic masculinity would look different than contemporary toxic masculinity.
And yet, I'm guessing that playing the game this way would make it very easy to relate and correlate one from the other. Because at the very least, even if the toxic traits present in the game are not as present in real life, the connection during game, that has to be pretty powerful nevertheless.
I mean, we have generally, every time I've sat down and played this with people, everyone has answered, yes, I can see parallels that are the same. Mm-hmm. Everyone finds something different from the game in my experience. A lot of it is because people have various different backgrounds. It's like just playing with the people that I play with and playing with the people that Peter plays with and playing with the people that I find at conventions. I'm going to find very different groups of people. And that is going to affect what they see in this game and what they get out of this game. If you sit down and play this game with, like I did for a blind play test, I sat down and observed them playing it because it was a blind play test. This weekend, everyone involved was a woman. There was a lot of conflicts, very stereotypically, because they wanted to get along. There still was conflicts, but you could tell that all of the players were more trying to find ways to somehow get along, even though they're playing this game that really says in order to get ahead, you have to be a conflict. So
that's quite interesting. Also, have you played this game with a team or a party of queer people around the table? Does it play differently?
It does. It really does matter who you're playing with. Like, a group of queer people can mean a lot of different things depending on which queer people you get in a room, right? So I've had one situation actually where, because I think I have played it like 3 times with primarily queer people, because being a queer game designer myself and running queer like board gaming and role-playing associations and similar things, those are people I have easy access to. So when I find players, those are the players I find in many cases. You get a stark difference from when you go to an indie role-playing room in a convention and you find a bunch of men. And they tend to have a lot of a harder time to, especially if there's not a lot of men in this queer group, they tend to have a lot harder time to actually taking on this role and portraying this toxic masculinity, especially if they haven't been expected to perform it during their lifetime. It's like they don't have that quote unquote training to do this behavior because no one told them they're supposed to take up that space, and they're not used to the whole having to fight over who's going to be the dominant voice right now. And in fact, one of the groups even decided very quickly on, without saying it explicitly, that they didn't really like having honor, which is one of the core mechanics in the game, is that you kind of like, you move honor around depending on what happens in the game. They very quickly decided, no, we don't want honor, because in order to get honor, I have to be an asshole, and I don't want to be an asshole. That makes me, as a player, feel like I'm an asshole, and that's uncomfortable. And we had to abort early, in fact, because one of the players was crying because they felt they'd been such an asshole in the game, which is also a very unexpected result.
So that's powerful.
Yes.
That's a triumph. Not very many games can actually enact that or entice that kind of reaction. That takes quite some doing. Oh, that sounds very attractive to me. Since that's very good. Okay, Characters. What kind of characters can people play in the game?
So the characters you can play is very limited, and that is by design. You have to play a man. You are going to explore toxic masculinity from the perspective of a man who's expected to perform it in his society. That is the premise. And then these men can have various types of traits that you pick. And these can be either traits that are seen as manly or traits that are seen as not so manly. For example, stuff like having a strong son or a beautiful woman, beautiful daughter, or having battle scars or owning land. Those are typically masculine traits. Whereas I have no sexual interest in women, or I have broken up with some of my relatives, or I'm in considerable debts. Those are things that are considered unmanly. And then you kind of pick a match between some set of those, and you also have this that kind of defines who you are. Like, those are kind of the tools you have as a player to design who you are. But a very big part of the kind of characters you play stems from the kind of interactions you can have with the other player characters. Again, we're all men. But that's only part of the story, because in every single scene, it is mandatory that you must have at least one major present woman character that is played by one of the players. Must be there. Otherwise, we do not care about what's happening in your scene. And the moment she leaves, the scene abruptly ends.
Okay.
So the women characters are in fact quite important as well, and you will be playing a woman at some point. It's possible to go through the game without it, but it's not very likely. And these women are, as they are in patriarchal societies all too often, primarily defined by reputations that the men give them. And then at the very end, the player who first introduced a woman, after everyone else has given the woman a reputation, will write down on the back of a card, if you're playing in person, what is that she actually wants out of life. And you see that when you're playing her, but not necessarily when you're playing against her. So if you're the one playing her in the scene, the first thing you do is you take up that index card, you look at the back, and you read what she wants in life. While everyone else sees you reading that card and sees her reputations.
Well, that wow, that can mean quite an awful lot. What happens when there is a mixed group of people around the table, as in men and women, playing the game? Because I can imagine it can become quite dangerously uncomfortable at times.
It absolutely can. And that was, in fact, one of the things we started thinking about very early. If we're going to make this game, we have to make this game not only palatable to women in general, like a group of women playing the game, but most of the time when women are playing role-playing games, they're a minority in a group that's mostly men, and that's the realistic situation we should expect. So that's the situation we need to be able to deal with. So we have stated in the beginning, as the very first steps in the setup, you are going to talk about the concept and aim of the game and the tone you want to set. Mm-hmm. And then you're going to talk about safety and subject matter using the CATS model by Patrick O'Leary. And in the safety and subject matter, we're going to recommend that you use a specific safety tool. Like the minimum would be something like an X card, where you like keep a card with an X on it in the middle and you touch that when something's uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. We recommend using some variation of a traffic light system. We have green, yellow, and red. You can signal, this is going great, this is my character being upset, not me, green. Or you can like send a warning when something's approaching a boundary, or like red when you just need to end the scene without asking anyone asking any questions. So we do have that built in as one of the very first things you do. And it says explicitly in the game, you shall do this. Here are some specific difficult topics that may appear in this game that you need to discuss your boundaries about are also mentioned. Typically stuff like, well, we're going to have violence in this game. Most likely, where are your boundaries on violence? There's going to be sexuality. Where are your boundaries on sexuality? There is a bunch of other problems that are very common to talk about in the Viking era. Like the Vikings had slaves. Do you want to deal with that? And how do you want to deal with that? How do you want to deal with sexual violence? There's many questions that you have to talk about before you begin this game. And having had that conversation at the start is a way to build the trust you need to actually use the safety tool functionally during the game.
Can this game become a gateway for assholes to be assholes around the table?
I think any game can be used in that way if you really want to. I do, however, think that this is a game where that's very difficult. Like, we're making a game where you are supposed to play a toxically masculine character, but at the same time, you can always be reined in by the rest of the group in various ways. And it's always this thing where at the typical threat, right? The typical danger here is you're someone in the group who, for some reason, is a minority or disenfranchised in some way, and you're playing with people who are from a majority group, typically men, and someone else is playing the main character of the scene, having all of the authority that comes with that, and all of the authority from the group, and then starts acting like an asshole. What are the checks and balances of this? Well, number one, the most exposed position you can have in a game like this is playing as a woman. And if you're playing as a woman, you can always just say, my character leaves. This will end the scene unless the main character crosses a line that most people do not want to cross, which is to chase after. For almost everyone, that's where you go from being rude to being actively creepy, if you're not letting someone walk away from you. And even if that happens, you still have that red card.
Mm.
And even after all of that has happened, at the very end of the scene, whoever has played a woman has a special power where the people who played women, typically one, sometimes two in practice, will choose one of the men who was the least manly. That person will lose honor. So even during the scene, mechanically, all of the players who are playing men still have to balance what they think the player who's playing the woman is going to think of their character at the end of the scene. So there is a lot of wiggle room in the power dynamics that make it so that you have a lot of escape room. There is a lot going on, and even though you are playing the character with the most honor, maybe, that honor also is something you feel like you have to defend all the time. It doesn't always make you feel like you have a choice in what you do. Very often we find a lot of players who said that they felt freer when they played the women than when they played the men, because the women didn't have to care about honor. They were not limited by that system. They don't need honor to do something. The men do if they want to have a conflict with another man. So it is, and very much, one of the dangerous things that can happen. Like, that is one of the big problems with this type of game. Are we going to be making a game that's just enabling bad behavior, or are we going to make a game that sufficiently critiques it? And I would like to think, at least, I mean, I'm partially here because I'm the designer, but I do feel that we've made a game where you can't be too much of an asshole, because then you will be spending your influence being an asshole, and all the other men will seize on it.
Okay. What kind of adventures can people play in this game? Because obviously it doesn't sound like it is the kind of going on an epic campaign that can last for months and months and months. In a D&D style. What kind of adventures are suitable for this game?
So this is much more from an indie game style, and specifically up here in Sweden. There's kind of this indie game scene of, you make games that explore relationships between characters, where the mechanics primarily revolve around relationships between the characters in various ways. And very much like a game of Fiasco or something similar, you take turns setting up the scene, and you maybe have a relationship map that shows who is related to whom and what way, and which are the important characters. So, like, those are elements you will commonly find in various types of indie games up here in Sweden. By far, not all of them, absolutely, but it's common. This game does fall square into that category, where you will kind of create the starting point during your first hour in the setup, where you make your characters, you make your locations, make it so that we all feel like we're all creating this together, we're all producing something together, we all get to make things up because we all made up the names for these places, for example. And then you go on to take turns going for a scene that moves in the direction of what your character wants. So it's very character driven, but it's also very, you have no idea how any scene is going to end. So you can't really plan ahead. You just have to go with where you end up. I did a live stream actually of the game yesterday, where one of the characters ended up dying before it was that person's first time to set up a scene.
Wow, how does that get resolved?
So when your character dies, we introduce a blood feud.
Mm-hmm.
And depending on which families are involved, it's either that one of the families own the blood feud, or it's up for grabs between the families involved. And then you will be playing a relative of the character you just played. Often you'll already have a relative somewhere that you could just pick up. Okay, so now I'm playing this name over here on my character map. Okay. And then I just very quickly assign some traits to the character, and then I'm good to go. So, like, making character is quite quick, and they're very much defined by the relationships to other characters.
So you just basically keep going.
Yeah, you just keep going. And the game plays in this current rules. Some of it, like the rules are, of course, still subject to change. It's not fully done yet. And this is one of the things we're thinking of maybe adjusting the game length. But in the current game length, you'll be playing in 3 acts. And each act, each player will get 1 scene each. So if you're playing 3 players, you will get 9 scenes in total. 4 players, 12. And at the end of each round, if you will, of each player having set 1 scene, then we're going to do a stop and we're going to tally up. Check who has the most honor. And then an honor is going to be moved around on the table depending on who looks up to the person with the most honor. Because that person is going to get a little bit boost because you're trying to side with the most powerful man. And then when we get all the background to the person with the most honor, that one is going to tell us who do you look down on. Because all of those are going to lose honor because the person who's the most powerful is looking down on you. So this kind of structure of playing 4 scenes and then seeing where the status is and update a little bit, and then we play 4 scenes and then we see where the status is. You do that 3 times. So it is very much geared towards shorter play.
Okay.
Ideally, you could play it in 1 evening, is the thinking, because then you have to debrief where you discuss what you actually experienced during the game afterwards.
So this is a game that's going to make you think an awful lot. Now, looking forward to that. Now, the question that I have to ask is, how have people received the game in general? Because I know what people can be like as soon as you mention things like, toxic masculinity or patriarchy, and immediately you find an awful lot of people frothing at the mouth because, oh my God, how dare you? What has it been like for you, the experience of releasing the game with such a premise?
So it's been very different when I've been at conventions playtesting it, because then you're playing with people who hear the pitch and decide that they're still interested, right?
Okay.
And you don't get the "how dare you make a game like this" when you're sitting face to face with the person. They're not going to say that to your face, generally speaking. Like not in an indie game room where you might already have played the game with them before. It's maybe not for me, and they'll sort off and find some other people to play with. That's what happens. This, especially in Sweden, people are not very confrontational in Sweden. And then you get one type of feedback, but you get a lot of you always get reactions. Some of them are very interested. Sometimes some people are very frustrated that their male character didn't get the last word in this scene because the woman left and he was about to tell her off after she told him off, and get very angry about this. And it's hilarious, in my opinion. So you do get a bit of that, but it's much more subdued and much more veiled, much more subtle in that way. And then you go online and everyone's crazy. So at first, what we got was part of my language here, but a miniature shitstorm.
Yeah.
There was kind of 2 camps, and they both hated us. One of them did it because, why are you saying men are toxic? I would love you to make a game about Vikings. Just cross out the little word toxic up there and just make it about a game about masculinity and Vikings, and then we're happy, right? Some of them veiled it as, oh, I don't think you're going to do this very historically accurate. Some of them were sophisticated enough to say, oh, but aren't you applying concepts that are modern to an ancient era? And is that really appropriate? And it's like, yes. Did you hear about the blood feuds in Iceland, how they almost collapsed society entirely? I would call that toxic, right? So we had that. And on the other side, we have a lot of worried feminists who are saying, okay, I don't trust this. This looks like it's going to be just another game that's about glorifying violence, and you're just making it sound feminist because then you think it will appeal more. I don't trust it. And those people we actually had to respond to more because they responded better generally to actually having their questions answered. And I did end up providing a frequently asked question, specifically kind of targeting that group so that they could have their fears delayed. And then that wave sort of died down. And now we've gotten a lot of, lately we started getting a lot of positive feedback from people who like, this is great. I'm so happy you're making this game. You should make more of it. I want to play this game.
Well, it's quite interesting because there are two types of fear in those responses. One is the fear of you're attacking me because of who I am or who I perceive myself to be. And the other one is, oh, I fear that this may lead to even more attacks toward me. So I can see how both fears are, one of them is ridiculous, the other one is understandable. Really.
Yeah. And the funny thing is that neither of the sides actually read our playtest document that we put up, which is, how internet works.
No.
Which is completely understandable. But we did learn very quickly that we need to be much more careful about how we communicate what we're trying to do with this game. And originally we were scared of being too overtly feminist in our outreach, because we were afraid that the people who really need to play this game may be put off interested. Yeah, that was our fear, that the people who actually need to play this game, the people we need to put this in the hand of, may not. They might say that feminism is great, but they might not pick up a feminist game in a bookstore. That's what we're afraid of.
That's right too. So why did you decide to actually market it as a game to explore toxic masculinity instead of, going for what the man babies said and say, why don't you just make a game about masculinity? Why, not, I'm not going to say hide it, but obfuscate the intention of the game?
Yeah. Quite frankly, because if it would be obvious anyway at the end of the day. Once you get to the debrief and it's explicitly is talking, like we would have to talk about toxic masculinity. And I think it's also when we're trying, like this is a heavy game to play and it's not a power trip. You can try to power trip with it. It's not going to go well for you. Just, I'm sorry. I'm saying it right now. That's what's going to happen. I've seen people try and it doesn't work out that way. I kind of feel like as a designer, I have a responsibility to be honest about what I'm getting into as well. Right.
That's fair enough.
So
does
feel like there's an honesty in it as well.
Has it, that, shitstorm that you had at the beginning, has it affected you? How did you prepare for that? Because you must have known that something like that could happen.
We knew and we were surprisingly prepared. And I had the luxury of having 3 white cis men who could deal with all of the actual raw comments for me, so I didn't have to look at them directly. Because like one of the problems we had originally is people saw, oh, it says Amos and it says Peter, and I read both of those as male names, so clearly these are 2 men who have designed this game, which is not the case at all. I'm sorry. Non-binary people exist. We are here. We have no intention of going anywhere. And even though the word didn't exist, people like me existed in those times as well. So, I mean, that was the first bit, and I didn't actually have to deal with all of that myself, because again, I had a publishing company to hide behind, which was great. Without that, I don't think I would have handled it. I don't think I would have been so bold as to actually publish this game if I didn't have a shield in that sense.
So what motivates you? And I know this is a very deeply personal question and you don't have to answer it, but in that case, what actually motivates you to want to get the game out there and go through all of that hardship?
Honestly, this game, I feel, is my way of acting in solidarity with all of the struggles that women around the world have had to face, that I have been a part of causing, and probably on some level unconsciously is still a part of causing. I need to do something, or I'm quite frankly just being full of shit when I talk about all of my feminist values, right? I can talk as much as I want. I can teach as much as I want, but I need to take action if I'm not going to be a hypocrite. This was my most effective way of doing that. So it really is that to a large degree. But it's also on another level, it's something that people don't realize is this is also self-defense for me.
Okay.
I too get targeted by toxic masculinity in various types of ways. It's expressed in transphobia, it's expressed in homophobia, it's expressed in fear of like non-standard masculinities, and like just me deciding some days, no, I'm not going to do anything masculine today. It's just not part of the agenda today.
Interesting.
I still have to deal with all of that.
Yeah.
Even if it doesn't affect me to the same degree and the same way, I'm still affected by it. And this is still partly self-defense.
Yeah, that makes, I think that makes perfect sense, really. Perfect sense. When is the game going to be out?
So it is, I don't have all of the dates on me, and you will be able to find more information about this on the Blackfish Publishing website. However, we should be fully done with everything, including print and shipping, later this spring, is what I can say. But we have a lot of interesting news coming up already in February, so do keep an eye out.
Excellent. Well, maybe I can have you back in February to talk about what else you've been doing with it, which that would be pretty awesome. So yeah, okay. Let's
have
wrap
to
it
keep in
up.
touch then. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh well, I'm up for that definitely. Okay. Let's wrap up the interview. I have just 3 more questions to ask you, which are really weird, very weird questions.
Good.
Let's see how they go. Okay. Question number 1 is, what is the best advice that no one has ever given you?
Oh, that is a difficult question. What is the best advice no one has ever given me? You weren't kidding. I mean, you said they were weird. You didn't say they were going to be this hard.
I am adorably deceitful.
You are absolutely. It's an excellent question. I'm very happy to be asked it, but what is it? I guess I'm going to have to settle for yes. This is going to sound very strange out of context, but it's something I had a very, very personal, very important moment in my life. I was, again, in public transport, just in a train terminal, just walking up the stairs, and I had the realization in my head, and the words were like this exactly: "You do not have to be like them." And that, to me, was a moment where I realized who I am does not have to be defined by society around me. I do not have to conform to a specific role that I'm assigned by society. I do not have to be like the men. I think that's probably going to be my answer.
Yeah, it's a very good answer, I can tell you. That must have been quite a powerful moment.
Oh, I cried.
I bet.
Oh, absolutely.
I bet, and good on you for having it. Okay, question number 2. What is the best mistake that you would like to make again?
Oof. I have to go. Do I actually want to go through that? Because I got an answer in my head, and I guess I'm just going to say it just because it's funny. I once started going to a fundamentalist Baptist church for 2 years because there was a very cute boy there. Very big mistake. Would I do it again? Probably. I'm sorry. It's just that's what popped into my head.
That's brilliant. That's absolutely brilliant. Join the enemy because it's cute. Yay!
Exactly.
Awesome.
Exactly.
Okay. Question number 3, last question. Imagine that you have a time machine and you go back in time and you meet your 10-year-old self and you say to your 10-year-old self, do not do this. What is this?
Oh God. Oh God. What is the thing I would not do? Honestly, don't hesitate to speak up when you like someone. Quite frankly.
Okay.
I did that all of my life until I was like 21 because homophobia and other nonsense. It's just not worth it. Don't hesitate.
Good advice. I like it. I like it a lot. Amos, thank you so much for being with me today. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I really hope that we will have the chance to do it again and again in the future for Blood Feud and whatever any other masterpiece you come to think about. That would be amazing.
I've had an absolute blast, and it's been a pleasure as well. So I'm just gonna have to somehow find the time in all of my extremely busy schedules making games.
Fingers crossed, my friend.
Fingers crossed.
And that's the interview. See, I told you it wasn't that bad. I told you that it wasn't that. No, it's got nothing to do with it. It's just a way of exploring things that people do, which is really shitty. And yes, you could make a game about toxic femininity. Go for it. Go. Do it. Do it. I'd love to see what happens. Do it. So anyway, please leave your comments down in the video description and the show notes. I really appreciate that. Leave us a review, please. It really helps an awful lot to get some visibility. And share the love. Please do share this episode so everybody can hear it. Thank you so much for being there. Truly, it is genuinely appreciated. And until the next time, I will talk to you very, very soon. Take care.